The sun hadn't even risen yet when Ethan Carter's alarm went off for the first time. He silenced it with a precise slap, already used to the routine. It was 5:30 a.m., and the quiet of the house contrasted with the bustle that would soon take over the day. Ethan got up slowly, ran a hand over his face, and went straight to the kitchen, where he'd get the coffee maker going before he was even fully awake. At 28, Ethan was the kind of man few noticed in the rush of the city, but everyone missed when he didn't show up. A delivery driver for a local appliance company, he spent his days crisscrossing neighborhoods in his white van, always with an R&B playlist playing softly and a polite smile on his lips. He was known for being kind, reliable, and relentlessly punctual. He lived with his mother, Judith, and his younger brother, Marcus, 15, ever since their father had died of a sudden heart attack 4 years earlier. Since then, Ethan had stepped into the role of head of the household. Not out of obligation but out of love. He helped his brother with homework and made a point to sit down for Sunday dinner with his mother, even if he worked every single day of the week. That particular day something felt different. It was Friday, and Ethan had managed to swap his Saturday shift with a coworker so he could take Marcus to a local college fair. The boy was excited about the idea of becoming the first in the family to go to college, and Ethan was proud of him as if the diploma were already hanging on their living room wall. As he sipped his black coffee and let his feet cool on the porch, Ethan looked out at the still empty street. It was an ordinary morning, with a clear sky and the smell of fresh bread drifting from the bakery on the corner. He didn't know, and couldn't have known, that within 48 hours his name would be all over social media, in local newspapers, and on signs held by protesters outside the Central Police Station. That morning, all Ethan was thinking about was finishing his route early, picking up his brother's favorite cereal, and maybe grabbing a pizza on the way home. He wasn't a hero or a martyr or a symbol of anything. He was just another American man trying to live with dignity, fighting to give his family a life that many would consider ordinary, but to him meant everything. And it was that normalcy that made his absence so outrageous. Ethan Carter's life was ordinary, yes. And for that very reason it was precious. It was Saturday afternoon. The sky was clear, with a few clouds lazily floating over the city of Fairview Springs, one of those suburbs where people say, nothing ever happens. Ethan had finished his deliveries earlier than expected. As he left the company warehouse, he called Marcus. "I'm stopping by the store to grab your cereal. Do you want anything else?" "Vanilla ice cream, please," his brother replied with a laugh. Ethan hung up smiling and took a shortcut through downtown to get to the market. He was still in his company uniform, ID badge hanging around his neck, and driving the van marked with the company's logo. Everything was normal. Traffic was light, and the song on the radio was an old Donny Hathaway tune he always let play through. It was at a nearly empty intersection that it all began. The red and blue lights appeared suddenly in the rearview mirror. A patrol car was following him closely, siren off, just the lights flashing. He pulled over without hesitation, like he always did. Turned off the engine, lowered the window, and waited, both hands visible on the steering wheel. One of the officers approached slowly, hand already resting on his weapon. The other walked around the van. "Good afternoon, sir. License and registration, please." "Of course, officer." Ethan kept his voice calm. He took the wallet from the console and handed over the documents. "You made a suspicious turn back there. Is there anything in the van I should know about?" "No, sir. Just empty deliveries now. I'm heading home." The tension rose quickly. The second officer asked him to step out of the vehicle. Ethan hesitated for a moment, not understanding why. When he calmly asked if he had done something wrong, he heard, "Get out now. Hands on your head." Confused, he complied. The body cameras were on, as would be revealed later, but the officers didn't know that a pedestrian across the street had also started filming with their phone. Ethan was placed against the side of the van. One of the officers began to search him, while the other pointed a taser at him. When he turned his head slightly to ask what was going on, a shout rang out. "Stop resisting." He didn't even have time to respond. The first officer slammed his body against the metal, while the second tried to restrain him with a chokehold. Within seconds, Ethan was on the ground. The air started to run out. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. "I can't breathe," was all he managed to say. Once, twice, 3 times. But there was no retreat. The scene lasted exactly 58 seconds before Ethan stopped moving. When the paramedics arrived, his pulse was faint. He was still alive but unconscious. He was rushed to the hospital, where he would enter a deep coma. The police would claim he had resisted arrest and attempted to assault the officers. But the videos told a very different story. That afternoon, Marcus waited for his brother to return with the cereal and ice cream. Judith, their mother, was warming up lasagna in the oven. Dinner sat on the table until the food went cold. Ethan never came home that night, and the city of Fairview Springs would never be the same again. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and despair. Ethan was intubated, motionless, surrounded by machines that kept his body functioning artificially. The heart monitor beeped in a slow, steady rhythm, a cold reminder that he was still there, but far too gone to hear his mother's whispers or feel his brother's hand squeezing his. Judith hadn't left his bedside for a single moment. Her eyes were sunken, her hands trembled, and her voice broke every time she spoke to the doctors. Marcus sat quietly in the corner of the room, his hoodie pulled over his head, headphones in, but with no sound playing. It was just a child's attempt to block out a reality too cruel to grasp. Outside, a support network was beginning to form. Friends, co-workers, and neighbors were in shock. Ethan was known. He was loved. He wasn't the kind of person who caused trouble. The official version, the one that claimed he had resisted, didn't sit right with anyone who knew him. 3 days later, Ethan was declared dead. He had suffered severe anoxic brain injury, caused by lack of oxygen during the restraint. The medical report was clear. Cause of death, homicide by asphyxiation. The news spread like wildfire. Local outlets began covering the case, and soon civil rights activists started calling for a federal investigation. Protests erupted outside the Fairview Springs City Hall and police station. Justice for Ethan became a hashtag, a banner, a rallying cry. But the official response was cold, bureaucratic, and defensive. The police department launched an internal investigation, promising rigor and transparency. Meanwhile, the 2 officers involved were placed on paid administrative leave, as per standard procedure. No arrests, no suspensions, not a single apology to the family. 4 weeks later, the case was brought before a state grand jury, the same model used in hundreds of similar cases. Prosecutors presented the videos, the medical reports, and the witness statements. But the jury was made up of ordinary citizens, many of them hesitant to openly question police actions. After 2 days of deliberation, the decision was announced. There is insufficient evidence to indict the officers involved. Judith collapsed in the courthouse hallway. Marcus punched the wall until his knuckles bled. And a heavy silence fell over Fairview Springs, not the silence of peace but of complicity. Ethan was dead. The cause was clear. But the system looked at it all and said, it wasn't a crime. To the Carter family, it was more than an injustice, it was a second killing. One in life, the other in memory. But the silence wouldn't last forever. The morning after the grand jury decision dawned gray, as if even the sky over Fairview Springs knew something was deeply wrong. At the Carter family's front door, the silence was broken by footsteps. Neighbors, friends, strangers, they came to leave flowers, notes, candles. Others came just to be there with the family. Because even if they didn't know what to say, everyone understood this couldn't be just another name in a statistic. Judith Carter didn't rest. In the same week she buried her son, she accepted invitations for local interviews and soon after, national ones. Her voice trembled, but it was steady. She didn't yell, she spoke with a calmness that cut deeper than any rage. My son was not a threat. My son was a person. And no one is going to bury that along with him. The body camera footage, previously kept under wraps, was released after public pressure and legal action. The video showed clearly, Ethan had cooperated. He never threatened the officers. Never acted violently. The footage was raw, direct, cruel. When he said, "I can't breathe," it wasn't a metaphor. It was a plea for help, ignored in real time. The country responded. Hashtag Justice for Ethan trended on Twitter. Marches broke out not just in Fairview Springs, but also in larger cities, Chicago, Atlanta, New York. Students took to the streets. Churches organized vigils. Civil rights activists placed Ethan's name alongside so many others. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Eric Garner, and now Ethan Carter. Marcus, his brother, spoke publicly for the first time at a local protest, in front of hundreds of people. "I just wanted to grow up with my brother, play video games with him, tell him when I got into college. But that was taken from me. And now I'm going to spend the rest of my life speaking for him." The family hired an independent legal team which filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. Pressure mounted on local officials. The mayor, once evasive, was forced to make a statement. The chief of police was called to testify before the state senate. The district attorney's office was accused of manipulating how the case was presented to the grand jury. The city was divided. Some residents, especially older ones, defended the officers. They said they were just doing their job. Others, especially younger and black residents, saw in Ethan's case the reflection of a violence that was historic, systemic, and suffocating. Judith knew she might lose in court, but she refused to lose the fight for memory and dignity. On a rainy night, she stood on stage at a conference in Washington, a photo of Ethan pinned to her chest, and said, "If the system believes my son didn't deserve justice, then we're going to change the system. My grief has become my fight, and I will not stop." And slowly the country began to listen. A year had passed since Ethan Carter's death. In front of the Fairview Springs police station, where protests had once been marked by outrage, there was now a permanent memorial. A mural with his face, fresh flowers, and a bronze plaque engraved with his final words, "I can't breathe." But it wasn't just the landscape that had changed. The Carter family's fight, driven by Judith's strength and Marcus's persistence, had reached the heart of the institutions. Under public pressure and following the federal investigation, the U.S. Department of Justice opened an inquiry into the Fairview Springs Police Department's conduct. The report released months later was damning: excessive use of force, recurring racial discrimination, and serious structural failures. The police chief resigned. 2 officers, the same ones involved in Ethan's encounter, were fired for ethical violations and misconduct, even though they were never criminally charged. The case led to the passage of a state law informally known as the Carter Law, which made public release of body cam footage mandatory in cases involving lethal force and established stricter protocols for police interventions. Marcus, now 16, turned his grief into action. He became a young activist, speaking at schools and youth forums, always wearing a necklace that carried his brother's wedding ring. Judith founded the Ethan Carter Institute, a non-profit that provides legal and psychological support to families of police violence victims. But the deepest legacy wasn't in laws or headlines. It was in the people. In every young black person who, when getting into a car or walking down a street, now found more watchful eyes, more phones recording, more people willing to not let silence win. Ethan didn't live to see it, but his story made it possible for others to live. One spring afternoon, Judith was walking through the same market where Ethan had promised to buy cereal and ice cream. A cashier recognized her, smiled with teary eyes, and said, "I think of your son every time my brother leaves the house. Thank you for making sure we don't forget." Judith smiled back, a mixture of sadness and pride on her face. At the front door of the house, Marcus was waiting. He had just received his acceptance letter to a university, the first in the family to attend college, just as Ethan had dreamed. And when he took the stage at his graduation years later, Marcus held his brother's photo in his hands and said, "My name is Marcus Carter, and everything I am started with who my brother was." And so, instead of ending, Ethan Carter's story continued, written not just in laws or books, but in the footsteps of all who dare to dream of justice.